Ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kito Kogong, and I have the privilege of being the facilitator for this masterclass. Just want to take some time to introduce our esteemed speaker for this masterclass. Fumani Mthembi is a co-founder of Pele Energy Group and the managing director of its subsidiary, Knowledge Pele. Pele is the largest 100% Black-owned independent energy and development company in South Africa. The group's mission is to contribute to structural transformation by executing on an infrastructure and impact investment model to transform rural, township, and peri-urban communities into thriving economies. Fumani holds an undergraduate degree in politics, philosophy, and economics, as well as a master's in science, society, and development from Sussex University. Fumani's focus is on the group's impact investment strategy, which entails the management of research, advisory, development, environmental, social, and governance, as well as community industrialization functions. Fun facts about Fumani: you won't believe it, but she doesn't have WhatsApp. Today I learned that we both enjoy a couple of rooibos with honey. And the last book that she read was Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. Ladies and gentlemen, Fumani Mthembi.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks so much, Kitso. I'm sorry that I'm seated. I decided to wear high shoes today, so my choices weren't the best. But I'm hoping that you'll all be able to hear me and that this really is a conversation rather than a one-way presentation. I do have a lot of slides, but I've learned from some of the other, what are we called? Teachers? Speakers. That format-wise, we can approach this quite creatively. So I really enjoyed Andiswa's way of doing it. I'll try and break up the presentation into 3 parts and then allow for engagement after each part. So yeah, once again, thank you. And thank you for coming to this session. The story that I have to share, whilst there are many touch points that refer to, I think, of course, sectors and concepts that are interesting and I guess quite in vogue right now, particularly renewable energy. What I'm really hoping to impart is a metaphor, an analogy, a way of thinking that you can apply to whatever it is that you are doing and whatever it is that stirs you. So, the sector is really just a way in which to think about how to apply concepts about self and how we show up in the world and the kind of world that we actually want to create. That's the conversation that I want to have with you. And I think from a starting point perspective, the most important message that I'd like you to take from this session is to really trust the meaning of your life and the journey and path that you are on. I believe, and in fact, what we stand for as Billy is a very sincere belief in the equality of human beings. And when we talk about human beings being equal, I think we all appreciate that we're not all the same, right? So equality is not necessarily sameness, but it's really about the fundamental value of our lives, and appreciating that at that level, we're all equal. And if our lives are equally valuable, then we're all entitled to a form of expression in this lifetime that makes our own lives as individuals meaningful, but perhaps more importantly, we're all entitled to contribute to the advancement of society, right? So it's important when you think of yourself, to then consider your personal narrative, your personal path, and appreciate that that uniqueness is precisely what you're here to bring to the fore. That is really what I'd like you to take from this conversation, that it's important to trust the meaning of your life, because that is the main anchor to which you need to attach, I guess, whatever your hopes and aspirations are. So in keeping with the theme of the self, okay, sorry, this is feeling a bit corporate-y. In keeping with just the theme of the self, I want to share, of course, a bit about who I am, and how I've understood my own life and trajectory, and I'll connect that to my business partners in Pele. But I was born in 1984 in Davidson, which is very much on the east. It was called the East Rand, but anyways, as east as Ekurhuleni gets before you start moving into Mpumalanga. And there's sort of relevance and importance around appreciating what it means to have been born in apartheid, but also during a time in the country when we were transitioning away from that phase. And I think in terms of my personal story, one of the key takeaways that I had growing up, and one of my key insights, was appreciating just how quickly inequality can form. You're born in a context, you have neighbors, you have friends, you have family around you. And then you quite quickly start to see how certain investments in your life are creating a very different trajectory for what is possible for you and what is possible for the people around you. So I grew up whilst, home was Davidson. Our ritual as a family every day was to leave Davidson, right? So you wake up and by 6:30, we're out of there. My parents have to go to work, we have to go to school, and, we were very fortunate that even though it was still apartheid, we were able to access, good schools outside of the township. And that, for me, has been the fundamental differentiator between myself and the friends that I've had from childhood, from a township context. That differentiator, whilst I understand to be a privilege, has also meant I have a responsibility, because even as a child, I recognize that something here is very unfair. It's unfair that at 8, my reading level is now exceeding friends of mine who are 10. Because it's really not by any choice of my own, right? I've been fortunate that my parents have made certain choices as a consequence of their own exposure. And my parents were working class people who simply had a certain kind of commitment to education and a certain access, as a function of their own networks, that said to them, something is possible, we can do something differently. But that is, as I think of it, that is a very arbitrary kind of advantage to have in life, right? A fair and just world shouldn't produce outcomes of that nature. A fair and just world would make it possible for most people, if not all of us, to have the opportunity to advance in society. So this was my starting position, just recognizing that something is happening in my life, even as a child, that's setting me on a path that's saying to me that, oh, I can occupy the entire world in a way that my peers from a different context don't have that same kind of appreciation. And that is the thing that started to burn within me. And it matters, again, going back to the 80s and the early 90s, that as I was coming into consciousness, South Africa was transforming, right? So the liberation heroes were all returning. We were watching the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All of those things were saying to us, justice is an important imperative. And so the question for me was always, what is my place in all of this? I'm clearly not, I didn't protest in 76. I didn't exist. I was not in exile. So what is my place, given when I'm born, given the platform that's been created for me? And that's the thing that was stirring within me. The same is true for my 5 business partners. And, I speak of the personal being political to say, politics, I think that, in fact, the simplest way of understanding politics is probably through the lens of political parties. Politics fundamentally is a reference to your value system. So your personal value system is how you show up in the world, and it's what we negotiate collectively to find out what makes us South African, what binds us together. It's a contestation of our value systems. So the personal is political, which is, I mean, I didn't make this particular slogan up, it's a known phrase. And for all five of us, the story is the same. We're all kids born in the 80s who had this advantage of being able to access, decent education, and then walked into corporate South Africa and felt burdened by it. We felt burdened by, once again, superficial markers of who matters and who doesn't, right? And so whilst another lens may look at me and go, ooh, Fumani, I'm so impressed by how you sound, that's not how I identify myself. And what we wanted for the world was a place, in particular in the South African context, where all Black South Africans can feel like they can participate in this economy equally and as valuable members of society. That is what really stirred us to exit corporate South Africa at an early age. I was 25 when we started the business, and that's us at our first office. It was a garage. I mean, yeah, a bit typical, but we literally worked in a garage. But we were all motivated. We'd all come from, corporate South Africa, predominantly the banking sector, and we wanted to do something that would elevate our peers. We speak at Billy of something called the justice dividend. We recognize that as a consequence of 1994, some of us were set on a very, very different path, and that dividend needs to be spread. And how you spread it is also by creating greater value for society, right? So our outlook is not just about redistribution, but it's also about how we create new value for society. And that's the story of Billy. I was talking earlier on to Nell, and he asked me, so how did you guys get into renewables? One, none of us were engineers, but two, we set out to create a youth development company. That's actually how we started Billy. It wasn't about renewables, but rather how do we develop the society? But what we knew instinctively is that we wanted agency in the story of how we would do it. My training, as Gitzo was saying, is in development and politics and so forth. And the one thing that I was very averse to was aid. So, I said, whatever we do, we're not going to get there using foreign money. We're going to have to create our own money to invest in our society. And so it meant that whilst our mission was youth development, we needed to create a commercial platform to make that possible. And so in a sort of confluence of events and what happened, and I think is also something I'd like to share with you guys, is that once you've chosen your path, the universe will conspire in your favor. The universe really does conspire in your favor. You don't need to have all the answers. And if my story is anything to go by, you can go forth and know that someone started a youth development company and ended up with a renewable energy IPP, right? The universe will conspire in your favor, but it's important that you take the leap and you go in that direction and do what? Trust the meaning of your life, your own instincts, particularly at this stage in your lives. Your instincts are so sharp, your insight into what needs to happen is so sharp, and your risk aversion is certainly much lower than the 40-year-old version of me. Now, when I think about things, I'm a lot more measured than who I was at 25. So I'm glad that I was who I was at 25 and took the leap, because it set me up for the platform that I now have, right? So do trust the meaning of your life, trust the instincts that you have about what the world ought to be like, and pursue that. So that's the five of us in our first garage. We remain together as equal shareholders in Billy, and we continue to build an organization that we're proud of, but also has many challenges, and that's just the nature of things. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated reaching, for us, what was probably the most important milestone in all of the things that we've achieved, which is 100 people employed by Billy, and that for us is, thank you. That's the goal, and so the importance here is, and of this slide, and I think I've made this point already, is that when you take a step back and you really assess the country that we were born into and the country that we live in today, whilst I think we all have choices to make. I'm a Black female born, in a township. I mean, quite clearly, I'm not born into privilege and wealth. But I can also appreciate that I was not as unfree as some people in this country, right? And recognizing whatever privilege you have is important because that is your primary resource, right? Recognizing that you are talented in ways that other people are not, which is true for all of us. That's important. Tapping into the good and sort of trying to silence the voice that tells you all the ways in which you're inadequate is really important, because that actually calls you to your place in society. And so for us, we recognize that, you know what, yes, I'm born Black in an apartheid country, but I'm not as unfree as other people. And so what is my responsibility? Because I have such a deep allegiance with that community and I want to see all of us rise. That is what really, birthed Philly. Sorry, anyways, this is yet another slide that contains many graphs, but I think the reason that I included this for your reference, and again, it's just tracking the history of this set of people, right? So born in 84, 94 happens when I'm 10. I graduate, at least complete my undergrad in 2005. And whilst WhatsApp didn't exist, thankfully then, I don't know why it exists now, but, for me, what's been sad actually about the process of hiring young people at Billy is realizing that unemployment has been a real prospect for them, despite the fact that they're degreed. When we graduated university, it didn't even occur to us that we could be unemployed. It just did not occur to us. That is the economy that we inherited. We were choosing, you were deciding who you want to be, what offer you want to take. And you could make that choice with just an undergrad degree. You didn't even need to have an honors degree. If you had an honors, you were doing a lot. Now exactly, it's like a joke to you guys, but now we hire grads and it's kind of normal for them to all have master's degrees straight out the gate, right? And that says a lot about the contraction of opportunity and how much more people need to invest in themselves in order to participate. In looking back, and of course, sort of hindsight helps in this sort of thing, and trying to trace our story and in tandem appreciating what was happening in the national economy. By the time that we started Billy, which is 2009, there were actually signs in this economy that things were not going in the right direction. We, again, I think it's youth and not so much science, because we weren't looking at GDP data to try and make these assessments. Sure, globally, we just gone through the global financial crisis, and that had some kind of impact. But at the time, our economy was actually quite resilient. But the political economy of South Africa was changing in a way that would turn the South Africa that we started working in into a South Africa that was less viable for young people. And so I think our starting the business also had something to do with the fact that we could feel this, even though we couldn't sort of articulate it in scientific terms at the time, right? So I don't think it's a coincidence that Billy was formed in 2009. I think it's very much a response to both global and national currents, and therefore I think a burning desire on our part to do something quite urgently about what was happening in our society. So I'll conclude part one by just summing up what Billy stands for and the values that we espouse in society. I've spoken about the justice dividend, which is at the very bottom, and that's about appreciating who you are as an individual, what privilege you have, and therefore what responsibility you have. And, I don't know if you guys have watched Chasing the Sun. I've loved both of them. And, it's about the book, and they talk about how pressure is a privilege. The fact that you can contemplate what responsibilities you have to society is the privilege. That's the advantage that you have. And for us, that's what the justice dividend is. It's okay, so you've got all these degrees, lucky you, now what, right? And that's what the justice dividend is about. Intellectual autonomy, I spoke to you about why it was important to us that we don't accept aid in order to do good work and advance development in the most vulnerable communities in South Africa. In the end, it's about our intellectual autonomy. And that has much deeper roots for us. It comes from appreciating quite deeply the colonial and apartheid history of the continent, and that the first and most important battle that had to be won was the intellectual battle. Someone had to say, you are inferior intellectually. Your ideas about the world are inferior. And once someone has won that battle over you, they've won everything else, right? So, our tagline at Billy is through power and knowledge, because we value knowledge so much. We have a research enterprise, and we gather our own research about the context in which we want to operate in, because it matters to us. Intellectual autonomy for us is not just about each and every research project, but is about the long history of Black Africans and the importance of reclaiming our knowledge and science and saying, this is ours and it's ours to own for eternity. And then Ubuntu, in the end, we really don't believe in going it alone. I'll chat to you a bit about our challenges, but I think the best thing we ever did for ourselves was to be a big team of founders. Because even in our darkest days, when we had no money, once again, this is us in our mid to late 20s starting the business, life is happening, right? People are going out, there's drinks on Fridays, there's stuff to be done. And for about 8 years, we couldn't participate in any of that. We at some point didn't have incomes, and then we moved on to earning stipends for a very long time. And, again, you've come from having a corporate job and you've gone to having very little. And those are choices that we made and could stomach because we had each other. So we were cool. We could chill together and dream about the future from the garage, and that's cool, So, I think Ubuntu exists on that level in that very direct sense. And then, of course, in the broader sense of what our collective responsibility is. And then Billy, for us, earlier on, when Lincoln was talking about, the fact that, we can't compromise on standards. That's another really important thing for us to always think about as Africans, being first, doing really well is something that we need to take seriously and take pride in. We have existed in a sort of an anti-intellectual culture, an anti-achievement culture that seeks to make us believe that doing well is somehow a capitulation on who we are as a people. For us at Billy, being first is important, not because we want to be standing on, a podium somewhere, but because we want to symbolize something for all Black people, to be reminded that we are those people, right? It's important that we are excellent. It's important that we strive for the first position. And it's not about us. It's not about the 5 of us. It's not about the 100 of us today. It's about what it symbolizes and what it's meant to signify to other Black people. Life is long. We're playing a long game, and we know why it matters to us that we're first. But from a position of first, we're able to influence and then make society what we really want it to be, right? So excellence is a really core value for us. And then ultimately, structural transformation. We're doing all of this not because we're invested in ourselves. If we wanted to be wealthy, we could have stayed in corporate South Africa. There are many paths to making money. Money was never the goal. The goal ultimately is to transform the entire structure of the socioeconomy. And so that is fundamentally what Billy represents. Yeah. So I'll pause here and take questions.
I think for me, it's 2 things, just a general comment. As a young leader in the energy space, I would just really like to tell you guys that your story is something we use amongst the Black young engineers in the renewable energy as a blueprint. We know all your stories. Everyone knows where you started. And yeah, whatever vision that you guys started with, it's working in the industry. Then the second part was, as a young person, always coming up with ideas and a vision, it comes easy. How did you guys come together, the 5 of you? Because a lot of the times, we all start initiatives, we all start side projects, but somehow, some way, things never work well because you always realize that you selected the wrong team members. I think for me, my advice is that how did you guys know? Because 5 is a large number. And it seems like even though you guys were all coming from like the banking, you're like different backgrounds, you're like the only female in that group. How did that come about?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much, Fumani, for a very inspiring story. So I'm currently working as a cybersecurity professional, but on the side, I run a mining a mining business in Central Africa, the Republic of Chad. So we into mining and processing of gold deposits. My question is, what is it that we can do as each one of us in this room to empower each other to think outside of our education and training and outside of our professional experiences to build a better Africa? And the second question is that, is there something wrong in our education system that is hindering us as the generation of Africa to be progressive? And by that, I just want you to touch on how do you transition from being a corporate Han in, in literal terms to
Thanks.
being pioneering projects just outside of South Africa and thriving in those environments where it's not so well classed as South Africa, so to say. Thank you.
I'll take those two and then.
Sure. Cool. Okay. One, awesome that you're in the sector. And thank you. I'm glad that it's making an impact. In terms of how we came together, Shempuno, we spoke before this, so he knows all the stories. But I mean, I'd say that there's some lack in this, right? Let me just go back a few slides and then it'll be okay. And then it's actually well organized. So the three guys before me are actually all cousins. So that's right, family business. And that helps. And you know, even as we've grown the business, we really encourage people to introduce their family to us, you know. So your sister is a travel agent, great, we'll work with their travel agency. We found it helpful because it just creates more meaningful bonds amongst us. Yeah, I mean, we could go on about the pros, the cons. In our case, it's worked. So they're all cousins. And then the guy who is to my left, GQ, was in class with the guy. So on the furthest ends, those guys were at UJ together in the same program. And so they met as students. So by the time I meet everyone in 2009, yeah, literally just before we started the business, they all know each other, you know, so there's a family bond, there's a friend. And so I'd worked at Standard Bank and took time off to do my master's. And so this is literally me coming back home, and now I'm like, I'm definitely not a banker. I'm going to do something else with my life. And one of my very close friends says to me, hey, I know guys who've just resigned from Standard Bank, and I don't think they really know much about development. They want to do it, but these are traders, corporate finance guys. I think you should meet with them. Very literally, we had one coffee, handshake, the end. You know, split the business 5 ways, and that's how we started our business, you know. So there is a bit of luck in that sort of combination. And subsequently, we've all become family in a very interesting way, which I'll explain to whoever cares on a personal level. But I think the point and what I try and impart as well is it helped us that money wasn't really our focus. And I think it also helped us that we didn't have money for a very long time, because we could focus on what we say we're really about, right? Fighting over money is probably the worst thing that can happen to people. And so just on the panel, Mam Kobodo was saying, you know, timing is a really important feature in life, right? And you can decide how different time, what the meaning of a time is as well, because that has to do with your presence of mind. What I try and share, even as we bring on board senior leaders into our organization, is that trust is such an important thing to have, because amongst all those people, I truly did not know them from a bar of soap. And I chose to trust them and they chose to trust me. that was it. You know, it was like your word is bond. And what also helped us, I think someone asked about our different skill sets, is that we all had a lane. We all had something different to focus on. So you're in corporate finance, you go talk to the banks. I'm going to figure out what we're going to do in communities. You go, you know, we all had different things to focus on. And I think that allowed us to not step on each other's toes. But again, trust is everything, because I have to trust that you're representing me correctly when you go to, you know, whatever engagement you're in. So trust really matters, but we also got lucky. How do we empower each other? Okay, maybe let me talk a bit about the education system. I think, like everyone here, actually, I really do value education. What I don't value, and I think what I needed to do for myself was separate myself from the performative aspects of education, because it's very tempting, and school does this too. In fact, I've forgotten her name, but the CA who got up and said, you know, all my life I've just been going. It's very tempting to think that that is the trajectory of life, you know, that you if it's this year and I'm in grade 1, next year I'm in grade 2, next year and oh, Mrs. So-and-so, look at me, I did so well, oh, give me a high five, right? And like the entire social institution can actually become that, where you're always looking for someone to affirm you. You need your teachers to give you a high five. You need your manager to give you a high five. Oh, give me great ratings on my KPIs. Did you not notice I did this great thing? That for me is the problem with the education system, because what it's doing is that it's taking you away from yourself. It's actually your great work, but you need someone else to tell you that this is good work. And when there's that separation between yourself and I'll say, yeah, yourself and yourself, I think that's probably the worst thing that the education system does. And so it's important that even though you are an achiever, you own those achievements for yourself, and you know, don't depend on them in order to feel like a valid human being, because you need to make a contribution to society. There's only one you. As far as we know, there's only this lifetime, so you need to do something in this lifetime based on your unique talents and attributes. And that is not something that anyone can tell you, not even when you are, I mean, we all know these stories. Sure, you know, there are a lot of A students who are at the top, but we also know stories of the A student that you can't really point out today, you know, like, where are they? Because so much of it was a performance for other people, but never in a true sort of extension of who they are and what their purpose is, you know. And I think that's a really important thing for us to keep in mind. As far as, you know, working in other environments, I mean, Chad is one thing, but so is Priska in South Africa. You know, there's so many parts of our country that aren't shiny, that don't look like the middle of Sandton. And yet that is where life is really happening. That is where development is really required. That is where your innovations are going to have the most impact. So I think, you know, we speak of ourselves as working in the dust. You know, that's where we ultimately actually work. And that is where the work is most gratifying, because I'm certain Standard Bank did not need another Fumani. But I know that my work and our impact in a Priska means a lot more, right? So I think it's important that we also just let go of, you know, things that glitter but are not gold. And I mean, I know you're in gold, but you know, but truly, not everything that glitters is gold. And it's kind of, at some point, you know, you have to experience it. You know, maybe you need to have the access card and all of these things that make you feel like, okay, I'm in the economy, and, you know, look at me with my laptop and my second cell phone or whatever. All of that stuff is cool, but at some point you mature beyond it. And what you're looking for is actually, how am I making the most of my life to serve society and to, you know, die someone who can be comfortable that I used my gifts and my talents to the best of my ability. Yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zanokolo King, and I'm a youth development practitioner. My question is, I was gonna ask, how did you know? Answer the question there. But now I wanna ask, obviously you did development studies, right? And I've recently found that I did something similar, by the way. I found that it's a vast industry now and it's continuing to grow. And now I'm presented with the problem of deciding which path I have to take, I'm presented with many opportunities, and I'm 24, and you said something about tapping into your privilege, right? I think I'm really intellectually talented, and now it presents as a challenge for me because I don't know what I want to do, because I know whatever I decide to do, I'll probably excel at that, How did you know? Because you said you decided on Pele at 25 and you committed to it for a very long time. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, Fumani. Hi, everybody. I'm Siyasanga Majola, Logistics Manager at Kimberly-Clark. Congratulations on your milestone and congratulations on your organization as well. So my question is as follows. There's a shift in power in South Africa, right? With everything that we see with the GNU, volatile markets, geopolitical wars, etc., right? And being in an organization that I'm currently in, we are seeing that our organization is being compared to China, for example. Private organizations are comparing themselves with other competitive organizations just to remain competitive, right? The other thing that I'm seeing, if I look at the South African economy, everybody is going into entrepreneurship, right? Everybody wants to monetize this, that, and the other. So the advice that I would like to get from you is, what precautionary advice can you share with someone who is at a crossroad of entering entrepreneurship or someone who's considering leaving corporate? Should I stay in corporate or should I enter the entrepreneurship market? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kujo Lebelo. I'm a senior marketing manager at financial services institution, who's actually started dibbling and dabbling in renewable energy. So you might ask, why is a marketing manager doing in your masterclass? That's why. I've got two-part question. One is really 25 and you make this big decision. I know it's easy telling the story backwards. Could you please give us just an understanding of what was really that moment, or the consolidation of the moments that had to happen for you to make the decision that you made, and how you had to come to grasps with your decision, and how you were able to help other people around you? Because there's conversation with parents, there's family, there's so much I can imagine that's going on. And when I look at you, I can imagine that you were quite diligent and, everyone had a plan for your life. That's the one end. And I think the second part is the industry you're in. And when I look at that slide, I see game changers, I see trailblazers, which means I see gatekeepers. And it would be interesting to understand how you maneuver the landscape where there are, gatekeepers, and now it is the race of renewable energy, which maybe it wasn't so much so 10 years ago. And I think, how do you keep yourself honest? Because once you get there, the easy thing is to you yourself become a gatekeeper. And so how do you keep yourself honest? Because when I look at the philosophy and everything you've said, I still see that inclusivity. And I still see that, the people first. And I still see the values and the integrity so potent that you initially started off with. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Felix. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm the MD and founder of a nonprofit called Siafunda. It's probably going to be a bit of a personal reflection. We also work in rural areas. And you mentioned, Priska, working in rural areas faces very difficult challenges that corporate South Africa will never understand. How have you knocked your head there? And I'm specifically asking to reflect on where you failed and how did you fail forward? Because we fundamentally believe at the NPO, context is supreme. If you don't understand someone's context, you can't understand them. So I'm asking, can you reflect on how you have had context engagements and failed miserably like I have? And
we don't fail.
Oh, I'm sorry. And then, just reflect on that, please. Thank you.
All right, so I'll try and sort of bring some ideas together. And the one is sort of, 25, how did you know, what happened? This for me, this slide is actually, so this is the rest of it. It has a lot to do with it. So I was on a fairly conventional path coming out of university, starting my first job, graduate program, etc. And my, then pursuing an international master's was also like, for me, part of the, the things I'm ticking off, this is all going to make me an awesome person. But this experience of being in the UK for me was very radicalizing. The University of Sussex, in fact, I remember my manager, who I adored, said to me, so this is 2008 when I'm set to leave. She was like, Fu, why are you not going to the LSE? Sussex is so left wing, it's not the thing right now. Because it was all about mainstream economics. And I actually chose Sussex because I was too young for some other scholarship, and I was like, I'm going where they'll take me, and this is where I'm headed. And I could not be more grateful for that experience, because it just changed my, if not changed, it really deepened my understanding of my own political identity, and made a lot of things that were abstract to me very concrete. I knew from a few weeks of being there that, oh, life is not actually better here. That was one of my big takeaways. Life is not better here in the UK. It might be for some of my other, peers and friends, but as a South African, this is not what I would choose. I am very happy to go back home and make South Africa better, but this is not a better existence objectively. And so that was important for me. And then also doing the contrast, when I started to understand where I was, the town or city of Brighton and Hove, which is where the university is in population terms the exact same size almost as Davidton. And yet it has 3 universities. Davidton doesn't have a university. At the time, it was headquarters, I think, to Unilever. Davidton is not headquarters to, puzzle shops and so forth. But you know what I mean? Like there's no big corporate that's stationed there. And that for me changed my concept of what was possible. Because even though I had that instinct growing up that, this whole thing of we wake up in Davidton and we must go somewhere else is wrong, I had not seen the counterfactual, and then I lived the counterfactual, and that transformed me. I was like, well, clearly something is possible. Something else is possible. We don't have to fall for this idea, because until then I thought Davidton was small. I really thought that. I didn't think you could have multiple universities in Davidton, world-class university. I did not have that concept. And so I just became a changed person in terms of my own understanding of what was possible. And you know what what they say about unseeing, you can't unsee. I couldn't unknow. And I had to commit to knowing something different. Now, soon after being back and starting on this journey, just speaking of how you negotiate with your parents, it was Census 2011. And at this point, I'm fully identified as an entrepreneur. I have business partners. We have an office in Roodepoort. It's, Obi's sister's garage. That's what we're doing. And the census is happening. An enumerator goes to my house, and I'm home later on, and I asked my mom, actually, what did you say about my employment status? And she was like, I said, you're unemployed. I have to give you petrol money. You are clearly unemployed. And that, that it hurt. And I understood the entire contradiction for her. Like, at that time, my dad was late, but all they wanted for us was to give us this platform. And she'd always say, get an education and then you'll be set, because I have nothing else to give you guys, So to have the education and not be set was obviously a big problem. In the end, even at the age of 25 or 20 or whatever it is, you're the only person who can live your life, and the forms of defiance where that you're going against your value system, but I know that I wasn't doing anything that was actually going against what my parents stood for. It was going to be uncomfortable for everyone for a lot longer than what I even thought. But at the level of my values, I knew that I was doing something that was in service actually of what they had raised me to do. Even if at the time they couldn't quite see it, but they were kind of going, okay, do your own thing. Here's 300 for petrol. Good luck, you know? So there was a lot of difficulty. You know, we started the business in 2009, and for a very long time, our incomes depended only on our research consultancy side of things. And that meant we were splitting, I mean, the lowest stipend I ever got from Billy was 3,000 rands. And that was much lower than my first paycheck when I was at Standard Bank, you know. But for between 2009 and 2015, I think the most I ever got was like 20,000 rands. And that was like, we're balling, you know, we were like, guys, this month our stipends, you know, and because everyone else was always a priority. We wanted to hire people. We wanted to be able to, you know, to afford engineers, to overcome gaps in our own skill set. And so we had to make those sacrifices. So, you know, one of the things that I know, on the one hand, I say, you know, the universe will always rise to meet your aspirations, but I also know that the universe will test the sincerity of who you say you are. So, you know, just because you've decided I'm going to be an entrepreneur and this is the path, doesn't mean it's now going to be an easier path. That's just not how things happen. You're just opening yourself up to a world of new challenges, you know, and one just needs an orientation that says, or at least appreciates that challenges are, in a sense, I think a call to elevate, you know, and so if you can appreciate that, okay, I'm going to elevate as a consequence of this experience, you just have to keep going. I do not have a firm view on whether or not you should go into corporate or be an entrepreneur. I really, I don't really believe in this like valorizing of entrepreneurs. I like, it's very American for me. Like, oh, you know, you started a business, it's successful, therefore you are. I don't believe that. It doesn't follow from financial success, from gigawatts, and in the case of Billy, it doesn't follow that we therefore are good and smart and all of these other virtues. That is very much about yourself and making choices that are authentic every single day of your life, regardless of where you find yourself. You know, sorry, I'm thinking of Andy. So I was at GCT with her, and I mean, she manages a much bigger balance sheet than Billy, right? So, and she's stayed within corporate. Who's doing better? It's kind of, for me, an irrelevant question. It's really about deciding who you are and being clear about how you want to contribute to society. You don't have to sort of turn entrepreneurship into this thing that it trumps every other way of participating in the economy. The most important thing is value creation and value contribution. On you know, gatekeepers in our sector, I think later on, which I probably won't get to because we're running out of time, in this presentation, I was going to tell you about how the state was such an important support system for the existence of Billy. So how do you build a company that has such deep roots in renewable energy without any engineers? And what we did was that we gamed the system, because the system currently in South Africa, which does need to transform, understands Black people as needing to buy into value that is created by white people. And whilst that is incorrect, what it meant for us is, okay, we know how to raise capital. And if we partner with the right, in that case, or at the time, actually in the sector, it was international partners. If we partner with the right international partners, the government is here to give us 200 million, 300 million. Why? Because the money is not coming to us. You know, so they're quite relaxed. They're like, oh, we're funding a project. You're building a solar farm. Great. The money is not going to be in your hands. Now, that is problematic in many ways because it gets in the way of our creating value as soon as we can, but it also is a way of gaming the system and recognizing it for what it is in today's terms. So how do we then avoid gatekeepers? No one cares about a bunch of 25-year-olds who work from a garage, right? No one will see you coming. No one thinks you have, you know, it's like, And people were choosing us because they preferred to work with us instead of the big known Black investment holding companies of the time. And we weren't even intending to be a Black investment holding company. But, it was like, really, it's a bunch of 25-year-olds. They're weak negotiators, whatever, and then like life unfolds and you demonstrate what your true intentions are. I think also our positioning ourselves in a way that's true to who we are as a company that cares about development also meant that typical energy IPPs didn't see us as a competitor. They're like, oh, they're here for the community, Shane, yeah, do that. And that's cool, now we're at 2 gigawatts and we're doing our community work, we're happy. So again, when you're true to yourself, there's always something that is different, and it's very tempting to try and conform and use the same language as everyone else so that you can be understood. But being true to yourself, I think, is the path. It's the path to finding your place.
Fumani,
Yes.
you'll have to forgive me.
Sorry, this is
Sorry. Because of the quality of time.